welcome to another edition of History with a Drag Queen, starring me, Karla Marx. So, we're back at it again with another amazing episode of History with a Drag Queen, and this time what are we going to do? We're going to recap, how did the First World War actually start? Okay, so a lot of people will say it started with Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting assassinated in 1914 in Sarajevo. And they're not wrong. That's the immediate cause of the First World War. But today we're going to talk about why did it come to this? Why was it such a big deal? Well, for that, we have to go back to 1870. In 1870, there actually wasn't a Germany, really. There was a bunch of states that were going to become Germany, ruled by Prussia, and they were like, we want to be a thing. And France was like, if you were a thing, we are going to war. Because France is the daddy of Europe. And all these Germanic states were like, what if there was, like, new Oompa Daddy? And so they were like, fight us about it. And France was like, let's do it. And that was a bad call for France. Because they were kind of done with the whole, like, winning wars thing. And they were, like, starting their new phase. It's like, what if we lose wars pretty spectacularly? So they did. They lost that war real bad. And in 1871, Germany was declared. Becomes a whole thing. And their plan was like, okay, let's make friends with everybody. France is going to hate us. We kind of took a bit of their country as ours. It's a whole thing. They're never going to be happy. But if we keep them alone and friendless, hey, we'll just give everybody else what they want. We run Europe. Should be cool. And that works. That works until the 1890s. Everybody and their dog has an alliance with Germany except for France. Works out for everybody except for the French. Okay? But then in 1890, they get a new Kaiser. And he's young, he's impetuous, he wants to go on, like, a new course. And everyone's like, okay, Kaiser, like, what's the new course? And he's like, it's gonna be new. Excited? And everyone's like, okay, but what are the details? Got nothing. No details. First thing he does is he's like, I don't trust Russians. Ends the treaty with Russia. The Russians are like, get on Grindr real quick. And they're like, hey, I'm single now. And France is like, on that. France comes over. It's like 1890 version of Netflix and chill. They come over with railroads and defense funding. And the Russians are like, let's make an Entente baby. So they do. They like scissor really hardcore. France and Russia are now allies. And Germany's like, why does everyone hate us? We have enemies on both sides. And, like, there's a couple Germans who are like, yeah, we kind of did that to ourselves. But that's not really a popular opinion amongst Germans at the time. So then the Kaiser's, like, looking around, and he's like, we're an empire. Let's do empire-y things. What should we do? And everyone's like, well, the British have, like, a huge navy and have, like, conquered places around the world, like, that seems like a shitty idea. Do we want to do it? And the Kaiser's like, done. So they're like, you know what we need if we're going to have, like, colonies, stolen possessions? We need a navy. And this is why the Germans make a pretty dumb decision. Because historically, the guy who ran the country, Otto von Bismarck, was like, you know what? We're a land power. We're going to sit on the continent of Europe. We're going to stay away from all these colonies. For the most part. And now the Germans in the 1890s with these new Kaiser are like, we're going to build a navy. And so they do. They build a giant-ass navy. And who does that piss off? The British. They were like, stay on Europe. We'll rule the rest of the world. The rest of the world is like, wait, we didn't sign up for this. But the British and the Germans were fine with this. Until the Germans start building this massive navy. And the English are like, okay, like, look, we have this whole thing. It's our kink. But every time you build a ship, we have to build two. We call it the two-power standard. So they do. The Germans build a new big ship. The British have to build two. And it sets off this huge arms race. And the Brits, after a while, are like, my dudes. This is really fucking annoying. Could you not? And the Germans are like, we love it. It's wild. And so what happens? Then the British also kind of cozy up to the French, of all people, who they've only spent the last 3,000 years fighting. But they're like, we hate that German guy more. So let's do this. So they get into bed together. And so there's this big alliance, loose alliance between France, Russia, and England. And it's all kind of the Germans' fault. They do this to themselves. But the Germans are like, it's cool. We've got friends. We've got the Austrians. okay, they're a bigger deal than they are now. Now we're like, Austria, what do you got? Strudel and rocks. But in those days, Austria owned like a quarter of Europe. They owned like the feisty part of Europe where, you know, it could like turn into a revolution any moment. And now it's like vacationy Europe, where it's like, ooh, let's go to the beach in Croatia, which is super fun and you should go once this whole thing's over. But Austria's got some problems because Austria has like 19 different official languages because they rule over so many different populations. So it's got some problems inside. The other guys that they're like, we got friends, is Italy. Okay, sure, Italy, fine, why not? Great pasta, great weather, try the veal. But the problem is that Austria and Italy both want the same bit of territory as theirs, so they're kind of like not the greatest friends, which is like already laying the groundwork for why Italy joins the West. Like Italy joins France, Russia, and Germany, or France, Russia, and Britain during the war, because they were fighting over the same area. So basically it's Germany and Austria together, and the Germans are like, shit, this doesn't even sound like a good idea. But they're really worried as, you know, 1914 is getting closer, there's already been like 2 Balkan wars, and then in the summer, the Archduke is killed. And it was kind of a weird thing to do, to kill the Archduke. He's the guy who's he's the heir to the empire. Any day now, the old Austrian Kaiser is gonna die, this Archduke is gonna become the new guy, everyone's like, okay, let's see what he does. He has a bit of a reputation as a reformer, and he's like, maybe we should give more power to, like, all of these other peoples that we've conquered, and, like, we'll run the foreign policy and tax you, but you get to kind of do what you want. The Serbs are not. They're not here for that. They're like, screw it. We're going to be our own selves. The Bosnians are really not happy because they got annexed a couple of years before this. So tensions are tight. What a great time to send the heir to the empire on a tour of the new places we've conquered. And so a bunch of Serbian guys, led by Gavrilo Princip, assassinate the Archduke, Franz Ferdinand. He's very dead. They're not super, like, torn up about it. I mean, they even, like, took gold plates, and like you can go and stand in Gavrilo Princip's footsteps for like the exact spot that he killed the Archduke. Anyways, they kill this dude, and Austria's like, my dudes, we can't let this stand. We have to do something. And so they come up with like a series of demands that are like so appalling that it would basically be the end of Serbia as like an independent state. And the Serbs like, we are so not okay with this. Okay. So then the Austrians are like, well, we're going to fight you. And the Serbs are like, bring it. And which is a weird thing, because Austria is huge and Serbia is very small, but the Serbs have one thing on their side, and that they're Slavic predominantly. And who is the big brother of all Slavs? The Russians. And the Russians are like, hey, you've got a pretty warm port. And Serbs are like, what about it? And the Russians are like, can I park my navy in that port? And that sounds sexual, and it probably was, but they actually wanted to put their navy in that port, because the problem with Russia, like Canada, it's pretty cold. And so their idea was like, wait a minute, we have nowhere to put all of our ships that we can still use them in the winter. We need a warm water port. And Serbia's like, if you help us against Austria, you can have a port. And the Russians are like, done. Or Dunsky. Da? And so, basically, Serbia's like, yeah, Austria, screw it, we got Russia on our side. And the Russians are like, probably, I don't know, we haven't really figured that out. So Austria's like, okay, well, we've got friends too. And they go to the Germans and they're like, hey, look, this guy kind of pissed us off, he called us names at the bar, and he kind of killed the Archduke. We gotta do something. And, like, a lot of the German ministers are like, this is the bad idea. But the Kaiser, who, like, kind of isn't in charge, but everyone's like, we'll follow him because it's honor. He's like, we're doing this. Let's kick some ass. And, like, there's German ministers who are like, okay, mein Kaiser, you know the Russians are not going to be cool with this. And he's like, bring it. We'll fight them. And then everyone's like, well, we don't actually have a plan to, like, just fight the Russians. We only came up with a plan to fight France and the Russians. And the French are like, wait, what? Why are we involved? And the Germans are like, you just, 'cause you know why. And so, literally, this is kind of how it goes down. Austria gets mad, declares war on Serbia. Serbia's like, bring it! And then the Austrians are like, maybe we will, we don't know yet. And then the Russians are like, this could turn into a war. We should, like, mobilize our army. And when they do that, the Germans are like, wartime, let's go. We're gonna fight France and Russia. And the French are, like, literally just on vacation this entire time. They're, like, drunk on a boat, and then they kind of find out, like, hey, Germany's gonna attack us. Should we do something about that? And it all just spirals out of control like this. And then the last major country to get involved is the British, and they're not really caring. Like, August 1st rolls around, the war starts like 3 days later, and they're like, maybe we should be worried about the Irish. Because dicking over the Irish is kind of the most English thing to do. And so that kind of spirals out of control, and eventually they're like, wait a minute, we should probably go and defend them. And the people of England are like, wait, who are we defending? And they're like, the Belgians! Which was really surprising at the time, because nobody liked Belgium. Like, it took 2 massive world wars to make Belgium a victim. Like, it was the, like, goop of the century that suddenly everyone's like, those poor Belgians. Because even amongst, like, colonizer European nations, they were, like, people were like, okay, Belgium, you gotta, like, tone it down. This is pretty shitty. Like, basically human rights violations were like, don't be Belgium. Just don't. Just whatever you do, just don't be like Belgium in the Congo. It's a whole nother topic. I'm not gonna get into it. Suffice it to say, wow. Like, even for white colonizers, wow. Whoa. But the Brits are like, well, we signed this piece of paper in 1830 and we're going to defend Belgian neutrality. So they did. They went to war to save Belgium. And everyone's kind of like, yeah, why not? And ultimately, this is why we don't let wars be decided by basically aristocratic, noble sensibilities. When it's like, well, you insulted my honor, so I'm going to go to war. Generally, you know, a nation needs to be threatened in a major way before millions of lives will be sacrificed. Generally. So anyways, that's kind of how the First World War started. I'm playing fast and loose with the details here. This is a colorful drag queen edition of it. The broad strokes are accurate. And if you don't like it, don't watch. Just kidding. Watch next week when I take your request and I'm going to do a rapid lightning round edition of 5 hot topics with history with a drag queen. See you then, babies.